Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers in search of creative teaching strategies delivered in the amount of time it takes to pack 5 teacher lunches or drive out for emergency coffee. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm glad to welcome you to episode 28, in which I interviewed John Spencer, author, podcaster, blogger, speaker, and YouTuber, all about small but important steps teachers can take to insert creativity into their classroom, even when they're feeling trapped by test prep and standardized curriculum. John Spencer is leading education in a direction I want to go. Whether he's sharing 10 creative risks to take with your students this year via podcast or adding video writing prompts and maker challenges to his YouTube channel, I'm interested in everything he puts out into the teaching stratosphere. Once a middle school teacher, now a college professor, he also finds time to run workshops and speak at schools across the country about how to incorporate more creativity into their classrooms. I'm so thrilled to share our conversation with you today. I'm so happy to welcome John Spencer to the show. I discovered his YouTube channel a few months ago and have been tornadoing through his videos, blog posts, podcast, and recent book ever since. I have no hesitation in saying I see him as one of the most creative and helpful voices out there in education today. Thanks so much for coming on today, John.
Well, thank you.
I'd love to start by just hearing a little in your own words about what you do and how you got to where you are.
So I am a professor. I'm a professor of educational technology, and so about half of the classes I teach are current classroom teachers who are getting a degree in educational technology, and then the other half are, I'm a cohort leader of pre-service teachers who are getting a master's in teaching and becoming a teacher. And so I taught middle school for 12 years, and I loved it. I still remember loving it the last year that I was in the classroom, which was really fun. And I feel like it was a long journey of, trying out design thinking and project-based learning and experimenting and having things work and having things fail, and of kind of getting to that place where students were really engaged in creative work in my classroom on a regular basis. That's kind of my journey.
Awesome. I wanted to start by talking about this wonderful concept I heard you mention in a podcast once, the wiggle room. I feel like so many teachers I talk to are frustrated by administrations who are focused on test prep or don't want them to try out unique projects because they aren't specifically tied to standards. And I always feel like there's got to be a way around it. And so when I heard you talk about wiggle room, it just made me happy.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So, the whole concept is that there's almost always more freedom in what we have to do than what we think. And that, when it comes to innovation and creativity, I really think those external limitations are real. I don't want to deny that. I felt the pressures of the test and everything. But I think a lot of times it's kind of a failure of our own imagination. We choose not to try things out. We choose not to ask, what if, or how much can I actually do, or what would really happen. And so I think a lot of times we kind of hamstring ourselves before we even make that effort. And so a lot of things that, like great ideas that we dream up, we just never even try them out of, I guess, kind of a place of fear. And then the second thing I think that connects to it is the whole idea of creative constraint and the notion that often when things are, when there are barriers and limitations, those end up being the very thing that you build everything on top of. And, a factory is a factory, and that's too bad. And it's one size fits all, but then factories become amazing lofts that artists live in, right? They become really cool spaces. And so, I think that's kind of the idea. And I think we can do that a lot. There's a lot of times where, actually the very thing that we feel boxed in by turns out to be the very thing that we could change and improve and transform.
I love that loft image. That's a great one to hang on to. I remember you talking in a podcast about, I think you were in a situation where you had to be teaching a certain thing and you figured out a way to twist it so that you could have a podcasting, was it a podcasting day in your class, or, like a weekly podcasting session? And I just love the idea of just channeling all those constraints into, let's learn it through podcasting.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, one of the things I had to do was this really rigid 4-hour language block. And so I had to do oral language development, and it was supposed to be a lot of people practicing a verb tense and practicing language. And I was teaching ELL at the time. And I found that I could have them do these podcasts where they were inquiry based. We did these Wonder Day podcasts and Wonder Week podcasts, and we called them Curiosity Casts. That was kind of the name of it.
That makes me so happy.
And it was so fun. And they ran with it, and they grew in confidence as speakers, because they were, like I said, they were ELL. And a similar thing happened with our Genius Hour projects. I had to teach grammar for an hour a day.
Wow.
And so it was like, oof, an hour of grammar every single day. Ouch. And again, they were all ELL. So I realized I could, teach these specific verb tenses that they actually didn't know. So it was really important that they learned the grammar. Yeah. But instead of doing workbooks, which is what everybody was doing, I said, wait a second, we can do these Geek Out blogs, which was kind of like a Genius Hour concept of, you're going to blog about whatever you want, and it's almost like 20% time. And I presented it to them as that. And so I would still teach the verb tense at the beginning of the week, but then I had all these different prompts and ideas and topics that connected to, that allowed them to practice that verb tense. And then they ran out, and they some of them were writing about skateboarding, some of them were writing about video games and fashion and deep sea creatures and all these things all over the place. And again, it was an example of taking the most dreaded piece of my day, which I was not excited about doing, and turning it into a Genius Hour.
Perfect. That's so nice to hear. It kind of segues into our next question. When I read Empower, the thing that struck me the most was the way that you talked about going from engagement to empowerment. That as teachers, a lot of times we're doing this dance, we want to get students to love what we love and cherish our subject, and that the next step beyond that, that it's good to engage our students, but that we want to go forward to empower them, like something like a choice blog can do. And one of my favorite parts of that book is when you talk about comparing the different types of education to Baskin-Robbins, Cold Stone Creamery, and Froyo places. It was the perfect metaphor for me. So can you share a little bit about that and talk about why Froyo is such a powerful option?
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes, like when I wrote that, because AJ and I wrote that book together, and there were some pieces he wrote and I wrote, and inevitably, kind of as a side thing, like every time I thought, this might not work in the book, we should probably not put that in, he would say, no, I like it, let's do that. And that was one of those moments. And then he would say, like there was a piece that he really worked on, which was this whole idea of the guide on the side, sage on the stage, guide on the ride. And I was like, oh, I really like that.
Yeah, I like that too.
Wasn't sure about that. And so, we both kind of had moments where we were putting something in. And like I said, that's kind of a fun part of collaboration.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was totally off topic. So the concept is that when we think about choice and differentiation, oftentimes we do it all. We do all the work as teachers, and then we kind of present the options to students. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's kind of the 31 flavors Baskin-Robbins approach, right? You have all these options. And by the way, I counted the flavors. There's more than 31, so it's a little bit deceptive. When you've got young kids who are trying to make up their mind, you're like, wow, there's a lot of options. And so the second one, though, is where people have more choice in what they're making, and that's Cold Stone Creamery. And I would say that's kind of the shift toward sort of the personalized learning, the a lot of the computer programs where it's tailored to the individual student, but it's all still programmed. It's all still done by the person. There's still not a lot of agency. I get choice in both the format and the content, I guess, at Cold Stone, but I really don't have a lot of choice in terms of how it's being done. The process is still theirs.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing any of it on my own. They work hard. I mean, you watch some of the Cold Stone. It looks hard. It looks really difficult.
Strong arm.
And then there's frozen yogurt where, at the Froyo place, they've built the systems and they've designed it. But then once you understand how the process works, you get to make it all yourself. And so if you want to put candy at the bottom and then put frozen yogurt and then candy on the top, you can do that. If you want to have 3 toppings or 5, if you control how much or how little you have, and it's truly yours. You're empowered. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about with the classroom was, there's a time and a place for, a Baskin Robbins, and there's a time and a place for it to be Cold Stone, and there's a time and a place for the Froyo approach. But my journey was definitely more toward moving toward that frozen yogurt place because it was just so hard. I spent some time in the Cold Stone phase.
Yeah, me too.
And really, and it was I was just like, I am
work.
leaving school so tired, and my students are leaving school not tired at all. And it just was like, there's something wrong here. And I think that's the tough thing with like empowering students is that I wish teachers understood is it's not extra work. It's like when they're truly empowered, they do a lot of the work themselves. And it actually was a piece of how, for me, teaching became fun. I mean, not that it wasn't fun before, but it really became a lot more fun.
More newness in each day, I would think, as you watch what students will create and design once you put the gears in place for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and because it's not it's not delivering the same lecture to 5 groups, right? Like it's unpredictable, but it's an adventure. It's fun.
Yeah, after I read the book, I felt so on board, and I realized that some of what I've done throughout my career has been the froyo, but it really made me want to push more in that direction. And so let's say a teacher listening wanted to get started and sort of be moving beyond the Baskin Robbins and Cold Stone and into that really empowered learning environment. Can you suggest 2 or 3 ways that a teacher could get started without just feeling overwhelmed by mass chaos?
Yeah, so I think, the first thing is like, to remember it's a journey. Yeah. So, having students own the assessment process and having them, track their own goals and learning and all this kind of stuff, that came way later for me. Mm-hmm. And it just takes time to build those systems and figure out what works and doesn't work and stuff like that. And so I would say, like, choose one area that you want to empower students in. And then the other piece that I would say is choose one area, and then also, maybe choose one project, and go with that. And so, for example, if you did the Wonder Day project, you take a wasted day, you take kind of those, there was an assembly and a field trip, and you have 3 hours, and those types of days.
Yeah.
And you experiment, and you say, we're going to do a Wonder Day, and kids can ask whatever question they want, and they can find the answer. They can share it in a creative way. And it's a small thing, but it's getting them to own their questions. Or you say, you know what, we're going to launch Genius Hour, and I'm going to do Geek Out vlogs for Genius Hour, and we're going to see how that goes. Or, you know what, we're going to try out maker challenges, and they're going to own the creative process and actually not follow recipes, but truly design things on their own and do maker challenges. And so there's, if you kind of choose one project and say, I'm going to do this with my students,
Yeah.
then I think that's worth celebrating, right? Because that is like, that might not seem that big to you as a teacher, but that's a big deal to your students.
Absolutely. I like that. And then you get your feet wet and they get their feet wet and you can see where you want to take it from there.
Yeah, because it's a long journey with lots of mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
And there's no shortcutting that. It's just how it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of pushes me into my next question, which is about design thinking, which is one of the options you suggest through your website and blog as a neat way to kind of move into this creative empowered space. And it's certainly been big at my school lately. We had a big summer professional development conference about it here. And I think a lot of teachers have heard about it, but just kind of in passing. You know, they see a quick article and it sounds kind of confusing and like it's about architecture. What exactly is it? And I know you have a whole book about it, but if you could distill a little bit, I mean, what is a way that an ELA teacher could get started with it?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of different design thinking models.
Yeah, true.
And so that's part of what leads to a lot of confusion, I think.
Yeah.
But I think if you were to distill it down to anything, it's that students should be actually designing something. They should own the entire process from the beginning to the end. And they should, that means that they should be asking questions. They should be engaged in some kind of inquiry. They should be doing some kind of research. And that piece is minimized in a lot of design thinking circles, but I think it's really important that they do research before they design anything. And that's actually where I think ELA teachers have kind of an advantage. Is a lot of them have been teaching research for a long time, and they understand research and information literacy really well in a way that isn't always true with STEM teachers.
Right.
And so, I think those are two components. And then there's going to be a piece where students ideate, where they brainstorm, they plan things out, and then they ultimately create something and launch it to an audience. There is a key component that has to come into play at some point, too, for it to truly be design thinking, and that's that there needs to be some kind of empathy. Now, some people in design thinking insist that you have to start with empathy for an audience, and you can't have real design thinking without that. I kind of think it happens at different points in different projects, and so the empathy piece is, I think, really important, that they have true empathy toward their audience. But you can do design thinking, for example, with a NaNoWriMo project, and having students creating a novel in a month. And you can go through the design thinking process. You can have them do market research and research ideas and all kinds of stuff before they actually plan out and then create their work. But at some point, whether it's when they launch it to an audience or when they're thinking about how to write with an audience in mind, they should have that place of empathy, right? Because authors are always feeling that empathy toward their audience. You always write with someone in mind. And so again, I think there are these tie-ins to ELA that aren't noticeable on the surface, but when you dig deep into design thinking, you find, this really connects to language arts, especially with the informational text stuff, things like that.
Yeah.
That tie in nicely. And so that's kind of the basic ideas behind design thinking. And I know I just probably explained it way too long, but I really think the process really, to me, should begin with a place of awareness. It should move into inquiry, brainstorming, kind of planning out what they're going to do, creating, revising, and launching it to an audience. Those are the big pieces.
I feel like design thinking, along with a lot of other pieces of your work, the wonder Day or Wonder Week, the Genius Hour, the Maker Challenges. They're doing this wonderful blending between disciplines that means a lot to me as a teacher. I feel like it's the direction the world is going, and it's what students need, where they take the skills of English or speaking and writing, the things that are traditional, but instead of just applying them to the same old types of writing, I mean, they can just apply them to anything, and it's just so much more meaningful to them then.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times too, we tend to forget with standards, and this kind of fits into that wiggle room concept, that there's some areas where we don't have any freedom on the standard, where it's really strong, and then there's always this part of every standard that we teach that turns out to be a lot of choice. And so, when I taught social studies, it was really tight on the concepts I had to teach. So I really couldn't do a true Genius Hour until I got into like an economics unit that fit into it and creating a product. Yeah. But then when I taught self-contained and I was teaching language arts as one of my things, I realized the ELA standards are content neutral. They're topic neutral, right? But they're very tight on they do have to be reading. They do have to be, comparing and contrasting and citing evidence and all these different types of things. And so that was a big aha moment for me when I taught self-contained, which also made it easier to kind of go cross-curricular, or not interdisciplinary, was the understanding that there's so much more freedom built into every standard than we think there is.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm amazed sometimes when I'm thinking about a project. I was designing this project where students were going to create their own food trucks, and I was looking through the standards, really, and I was cool. Like, there are tons of standards that this meets. This is fine. This is, it might seem really outrageous, but they're going to be writing, they're going to be designing, they're going to be arguing. I mean, it's going to be fine.
Yeah. You might have them do advertisements.
Yeah, exactly. Social media for their food
we had to do
and
elements of persuasion and persuasive writing, and it was like, oh, wait a second. If I'm having them launch their work to an audience,
there you go.
I'm gonna tie that into marketing. And that's a weird thing that kids don't learn how to market what they've created. Right. It's almost has like a negative connotation, but I mean, it's basically you're persuading. You're like, that should be happening,
Yeah, agreed. If you're going to go into an awful lot of fields these days, you want to be able to convince people that your ideas are valuable.
Yeah, it's so true. How did the food truck project go?
Well, I'm actually just still in the design process of it,
cool.
But it's been really fun.
That's awesome. I want to hear about it.
Thanks.
Make sure to put it in your podcast.
I should do that. I'll make a note. Food truck podcast.
Yes.
All right. Well, I wanted to wrap up with something just on kind of a different note, but it's something that I've really valued in listening to your podcast when you talked about changing the narrative of our schools. And listening to this, I just kind of got goosebumps. I love your idea and your sort of charge to the teaching community that we should share more positive stories on social media. It's so easy to fall into what are our frustrations and how tired we feel sometimes and, whatever. But I just love what you said. Let's show the wonder. Let's show what's going well. Let's talk about that student that's making something amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Sure. I'm kind of tempted to launch some sort of social media challenge hashtag. I think people need to get out there with hashtag great kids, great schools, or hashtag applauding our students.
I like that. I like that idea.
Thanks.
Love the idea of that.
Well, thank you so much for taking time. I know that you're super busy and your computer crashed yesterday, and I just really appreciate you coming on. How can teachers connect with you to learn more about all these wonderful ideas?
So you can find it on my blog. It's spencerauthor.com. You can connect with me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @SpencerIdeas, and then I have a Facebook page. So I think it's facebook.com Spencer Education. I'm pretty sure that's
Perfect.
what it
Well,
is.
I will link it all from the show notes today
All
so that
right,
teachers
cool.
will have an easy route to find you.
Well,
All right.
thank
So
you.
yeah, thank you again. Have a wonderful week once your computer gets back in action.
That's right. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. Today's show notes are full of links to John's fabulous work, and you don't want to miss that. Just head to www.nowsparkcreativity.com and click on the podcast tab at the top of the page, then choose episode 28. I also often share John's work in my Facebook group, Creative High School English. If you'd like to connect with more than 1,000 other creative English teachers across the world and get advice and inspiration from them on a daily basis, please consider joining us. You'll see the link at the top of my website, right by the podcast tab. The Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. The Education Podcast Network, podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more podcast recommendations, visit edupodcastnetwork.com.